It's my privilege now to introduce to you our author for the day and our speaker for this 25th annual Lunch for Literacy. I had the opportunity to meet Camron Wright yesterday as he appeared on our News at 4 on Idaho's News Channel 7. So I can tell you this, he's a wonderful interview. I can tell you another thing about him. He has a wonderful website, and you can learn a lot about him there. But the best news is that he traveled here from his home in Utah to be with us today, and you get to hear from him firsthand. Camron Wright was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah. He has a master's degree in writing and public relations from Westminster College. His first book, Letters for Emily, was a Reader's Choice Award winner, as well as a selection of the Doubleday Book Club and the Literary Guild. And then his next book, the one that you've seen me talking about on Channel 7 as we've been advertising this event, The Rent Collector, it won Best Novel of the Year from the Whitney Awards and was a nominee for the prestigious International Dublin Literary Award. The Orphan Keeper won 2016 Book of the Year, gold accolades in multicultural fiction from Forward Reviews, and it was winner of Best General Fiction from the Whitney Awards. And now I know you want to hear from him, so I am going to ask you all, you don't have to listen to me anymore, but please take your seats and let's enjoy welcoming to the stage our author today, our guest author, Camron Wright. Give him one of those great Idaho welcomes.
Okay, it's such an honor to be here. There we go, okay. Just amazing to be here, such a great group, to look out on all the smiling faces, and so thrilled to be part of this cause today. At a political convention, there was a sign that was hung outside the door where the speechwriters were housed, and the handwritten message read, "Make speeches gooder and more short." So I'm going to do my best to try and follow that advice here today. For the greater portion of my professional life, I've been involved in PR and marketing, and as such, I tend to view the world in terms of slogans. I think slogans are a great way for me to sort of wrap my mind around a project or an idea. And so as I kind of thought about that, I was intrigued by a slogan that was hung outside of a business. It read, "Veterinarian and taxidermist." I know, right? Most intriguing was the slogan beneath, "Either way, your pet goes home." Sorry. So with that in mind, how would I sloganize my remarks that I'll speak about today? I think I would say, lessons I've learned from the dump. We're here to help further the cause of literacy, and my book, The Rent Collector, which takes place in a Cambodian garbage dump, I think best dialogues the spirit of your amazing work, and so I'm going to kind of focus my remarks around this particular book today. So to that end, let's dive right in. Trevor, my second oldest son, he spent some time in Cambodia doing some church service. If you're confused, if you can see the screen, he's the skinny white kid. And he later went back and he worked for a group in Cambodia called the Cambodian Children's Fund. They are an amazing charity that rescues kids out of poverty and provides an education. And after he worked for CCF, in school he was a film major. And so for his final project, he and some of his friends went back to Cambodia to shoot a documentary on this charity. They made all of the arrangements. They kind of storyboarded out what they wanted to say in this documentary. Borrowed a lot of expensive film equipment from the university, and then they jumped on a plane and they headed over to Cambodia. When they arrived, life didn't turn out as they had hoped. Between the time that they had worked for CCF and then when they returned to shoot this documentary, the man who had started this charity had hired a new person in country to kind of help him run the charity. And she wasn't there when the kids worked for CCF. She didn't know who they were. She didn't understand why they wanted to shoot this documentary. And so for whatever reason, she started to put up roadblocks, which made it very difficult for them. And I remember he called and he was so distraught and he said, what are we going to do? We only have limited time and we have all this equipment and we have no film to shoot. And so with that kind of disaster looming, they wandered down to the Stung Min Che dump, and while they were there, by luck or grace if you prefer, they stumbled into Sang Lee and her family. And she agreed to let these, strange American kids who speak the language better than she does follow her family around and document what life was like for them living in a Cambodian garbage dump. And so they completely shifted the focus of their film. In the end, the film they made was called River of Victory, and it turned out to be so much better than the documentary that they had planned. There had already been other documentaries shot on the Cambodian Children's Fund, and so I'm sure had they gone down that road, theirs would have been fine, but it just would have been one more on the pile. Instead, their film was nominated for the IDA Awards. Now, the IDA Awards are the International Documentary Association Awards. It's kind of the Oscars of documentary filmmaking. They allow 5 student films in every year, and the year that theirs was nominated, there were only 2 from the US. The other 3 were from other countries around the world. And so they got to go to LA and ride in a limo and walk the red carpet and meet movie stars, and their professors were ecstatic. It was the first time that a student film from their university had ever been nominated. But more important than that, their film has made a difference. A portion of the proceeds go to not only help Sang Lee and her family, but also the Cambodian Children's Fund. And so the lesson I learned, kind of standing back and watching this disaster happen, is really that obstacles are good fortune in disguise. Had they gone down that original road, as I said, it would have been, I'm sure, a fine film, but just one more on the pile. Instead, they've been able to make a film that's made a difference, and I think our lives are like that. We have these problems that arise in our lives, these disasters, if you will. But with a little bit of hindsight, we realize they're not disasters at all. They push us in a position to do something that we otherwise wouldn't do, to learn something we otherwise wouldn't have learned, help somebody that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to help. And so it's kind of a lesson that I've tried to take to heart, and it's caused me to, I think, hopefully look at my own problems differently. Well, when Trevor finished filming, he came home, and he had hours and hours of footage, and he had to narrow that footage down to a 60-minute documentary, and so he asked for help. And the first thought that rolled through my mind was, Trevor, I'm not going to be much help. I just don't have anything in common with the people there. And then I started to watch the footage, fell in love with Sang Lee as a character. Her determination as a mother to do whatever she needed to save her son was just inspiring. And it didn't take me very long before I realized, you know what, I have everything in common with the people there. She wants the same things for her family that I would want for mine, that you all would want for yours. Kids to get a great education, spouse to be happy, family to do well. And it was this moment, this epiphany, if you will, where I realized, you know what, it doesn't matter whether we're Cambodia or Idaho or wherever we may be, we're just people. And I think we have more in common. We have values that join us together, more so than differences that drive us apart. And so I thought, you know what, thank you. I thought it's time to write another book, and so I took real people, real events, and then I wove them into sort of this fictional narrative that I wanted to tell, and the result was The Rent Collector. Interestingly, I wrote the entire book without ever having visited the country. I used only my son's footage and then a handful of books on the country and the culture. And keep in mind, this was a time when my son filmed the documentary. By the time he finished and then came back and then the book came out, 4 years had passed. And I remember that, they lost track of the family because, there's no phones, no electricity. And so, and after they finished the documentary, the government came in and closed the dump. And so the vast majority of people who had worked in the dump kind of moved on. And we went back not really knowing if we would find Sang Lee and her family. I just thought, I can't have the book come out and not have it help them in some way. And so we traveled back to Cambodia. We were able to find Sang Lee and her family. And after that experience, I came home and I thought, I was worried going that I was going to have to change all of these things in the book. I came home and I changed nothing. And in pondering that, I thought, why is that? Well, I'd been able to nail the culture and so forth from the hours of documentary footage from my son. But really, that's the message of the book, right? Is we're people, whether it's set in Cambodia or no matter where it's a story of the human condition, and that's something that doesn't change. It's a story that teaches we're all the same, we all struggle, we're all looking for and need redemption. Now, when you write a book based on real people and real events, and you weave it into sort of this fictional narrative, the most common question by far I'm asked is, what's true? In the story, I tried to stay very true to Sang Lee and her husband as far as their traits, their personalities. But let's take the rent collector. Sang Lee actually had an angry old Cambodian woman who came around and collected her rent, and I found that amazing, one that she paid rent, But you find yourself as a writer always asking questions, who are these people? What was her story? What is she about? Why is she angry? Well, I took what I knew about her, and everything I know about her I just told you, an angry old Cambodian woman who collected Sang Lee's rent, and I used her in my story to tell what happened to the Khmer people during the revolution. So I did a lot of research. I learned that there were hundreds of family members who watched other family members get killed right in front of them. They were marched out into the provinces to work in the rice fields. They went through these horrific things. And so I took these real events, these real things that happened to real people, and I wove them into the character of Sopeep Sin. Well, is it true or is it not true? You can see how it still gets a little fuzzy. I want to say that I stayed very true to Sang Lee, and that portion of the story I tried to write exactly as it happened. They were following the family around, filming them, and they realized her son is very sick. He had the little protruding belly. He looked like the care poster. He couldn't keep anything down. She had taken him to countless Western doctors, doctors that you and I would go to. They'll go there and they'll set up kind of a 2-week charity clinic or something for the people to come in and get care, and she'd been given vitamins, antibiotics, other medicine. As long as he was on the medicine, he seemed to be fine. As soon as the medicine would run out, he would immediately get sick again. And then in the middle of filming, she got into her head that she needed to take her son back to the province to see the old Cambodian healer. And I love this. When I'm watching it happen in the footage, I was mesmerized. As a writer, I thought that's wonderful, right? Because now you've got the two clash of cultures. You've got the old Cambodian ways clashing against the modern Western ways, and I love that from a story point of view. Well, I wrote the scene in the book exactly as it happened. There was this old Cambodian healer, and he had a dirty teacup that was turned upside down, broken, and this black gooey tar that was in the bottom, and he was mixing it together, and he had an array of dirty hypodermic needles, and he took one and he stirred it into the black gooey tar, and then he took the baby and he bent his wrist back and he started to poke him in his wrist with this dirty needle with this black gooey substance. He poked both his wrists, and then he poked him in his feet, and of course the baby's screaming horrifically. And then he has Sang Lee take what's left over and has her put it in his mouth. And so now he's gagging and coughing. And I'm watching this footage, and I was horrified. As a parent, had I been able to reach through the screen and rescue the child, I would have. Now here's the irony. Trevor went back 6 months later. The child was fine. He's been fine ever since. When we returned to Cambodia, by then he was about 7 years old, and he was so healthy, he's annoying. He was jumping all over. He's totally hyperactive. He was getting into trouble. And I looked at his wrists, and he still had little black marks in his wrists. It had tattooed him where the healer had poked him in his wrists. Now, how do you explain that, right? Countless Western modern doctors can't help the child. The Cambodian healer, the first thing he said when he saw the child was, "Oh, I can cure him." He was completely confident, and he did. I'm often asked, well, what was it? And my reply is, I don't know, but I'd like to go back and find out because I want to start a pharmaceutical company. So while this entire episode is really astonishing, what was even more astonishing to me was Sang Lee's determination as a mother to do whatever it was going to take to find a cure for her son. What do we learn? What's the lesson? I think the lesson is there's times in our life when we need to be relentless. Sang Lee was living in a dump. She had nothing. She had no money. She had no way to help her child. She so easily could have given up, but she didn't. A friend of mine once said it like this: passion finds a way. I love Sang Lee because she embodies everything that an author dreams about in a character. She's vulnerable. She has times of doubt. She wonders if life is worth it, if she can get up and do it all the next day. But she gets up and she does her best to try and face that struggle and to carry on. She tries to hold to the belief that there's reason and purpose in life, and I have to think, if Sang Lee can do it living in the dump, then with all the blessings that we have in our lives, I should be able to do it, and you should be able to do it as well. No matter how difficult or humble of circumstance any of you may have come from, I would venture to say that all of us would just be considered super rich by the socioeconomic standards of those in the dump. Those living at the dump, they get up, they would work all day long, they would make enough money to maybe eat that night and hopefully have a little bit left over for the next day, and then it would all start again. The dump is quite frankly a horrendous place. You have to watch where you step. There's human waste everywhere. The stench is overpowering. The flies buzz so loud that the hum starts to really grate on your nerves. And yet as I looked around, and every day we were there, we went to the dump to visit with Sang Lee and her family, we were greeted by smiles and kids playing soccer and laughing. And I found myself asking, how is this possible? I mean, looking around at the circumstance and yet seeing such happiness. I think the answer can only be explained that happiness and wealth, happiness and stuff aren't related. The iPhones, the smartphones, the laptops, the cars, the money, there's not a direct relation. Now, I don't think that means that it's bad to seek out financial wealth and security and have a nice place to live, but what it means is that we don't need those things to find happiness and satisfaction and peace and laughter and joy in our lives. Now, I want to tie all this into learning and literacy. I write about Sang Lee learning to read and the joy and satisfaction that comes to her, and because of that, I'm often asked, can Sang Lee really read? She originally told Trevor that she couldn't read, and then we found out that she can read, just not very well. He said that's really common with the Khmer people. They'll be embarrassed, and so they'll say they can't do something even though they can. Well, one of the first things that we wanted to do to try and help the family was to pay Sang Lee to sign some bookmarks. And so we wanted to teach her to write her name in English. She could already write her name in Khmer, and we thought, hey, if we could teach her to write her name in English, that would be really cool. And it was just like teaching a first grader. We had the letters written out, and she would look at it, and then she would go to her paper, and she'd practice, and then she'd look at it again. And as she was doing this, the neighbors started to gather around and watch her. And pretty soon there were 5, 6, 7, 8 people gathered around. And it didn't take long before they began to instruct her. And they would say, no, pull your Y down. And they're telling her. And we had a Khmer cameraman who was there filming. And as a documentary filmmaker, you're trained to stay behind the camera. You're never, ever supposed to interject yourself into the story. And I was watching him, and he's filming. And pretty soon he started going, no, you need to. And he's telling her how to do it. And then Sang Lee turned around, and she was just beaming. There was such joy in her face, in her smile. And I thought, that's it. That's the moment that I wrote about. Now, in my book, it's this moment where she realizes she can read Khmer. I'm watching it happen in real life as she's learning to write her name in English, but the emotion was exactly the same. And so people will ask, is it real? It's absolutely real. I was there and I saw it. In addition to writing her name, Sang Lee's been practicing reading. And there were several months ago that she made a comment that I thought was astounding, which applies so directly to the cause that we're all here to support today. She said, now that I'm reading more, I'm not as scared to be at the dump at night. Isn't that remarkable? Now, had it been me, I would have said, now that I bought a gun, I'm not as scared to be at the dump at night. But with Sang Lee, it was the reading that gave her confidence, that took fear away, and I just think that's amazing, and I think it's a lesson that applies to everybody. If we will read more in our lives, it will indeed take fear away, it'll give us confidence. I think she stumbled across this principle that is, it's just important and it's valid, and it's one that we need to remember. Let me end with an example of somebody who's doing just that. I talked about the Cambodian Children's Fund, the organization that my son worked for. It was started by this man. His name is Scott Neeson. Scott was a bigwig in Hollywood. When I say a bigwig, Scott was the president of 20th Century Fox International. He was an executive at Sony Pictures. The movies that Scott was in charge of were movies like Braveheart, Titanic, X-Men, all massive Hollywood blockbusters. He drove a sports car. He lived in a mansion. He lived 2 doors down from Cindy Crawford, the supermodel. I read one article on Scott that said he was earning $1 million a year salary, and that was many, many years ago. He was living the dream, right? He was in Cambodia. He was in between movies, just kind of kicking around as a tourist, and while he was there, he stumbled across the Stung Min Che dump, and he noticed the orphan kids working in the trash, and he's a decent guy. He thought, you know what, I have tons of money. I should do something to help these kids. And so he started the Cambodian Children's Fund, and their sole purpose was to take these kids, these orphans, out of the dump and provide a way for them to get an education. And so for 2 years, he commuted. He'd be in Hollywood doing his movie thing. Once a month, he'd jump on a plane, head over to Cambodia to try and keep this fledgling organization going. Well, he was in Cambodia, he was at the dump, and he was trying to save a couple of little Cambodian girls who were there. And while he was doing that, his cell phone rang. On the other end of the line was a powerful Hollywood agent. The agent was at the airport, standing beside his client, who's a well-known Hollywood actor. The actor was about to climb on a private jet that Sony Pictures had provided, and he was furious because the amenities on the jet were not the amenities he was expecting. Scott was listening to this, listening to the actor rant and rave, and then he heard the actor say to his agent, "My life was not meant to be this difficult." Can you imagine? Scott's at the dump when this all happens. He goes nuts. He says, "That's it. I'm not putting up with this crap anymore." So he walks away from the yachts, the cars, the parties, the mansions, the prestige. He moves to Cambodia full-time to run his organization. He used his own money until his money ran out. When his money ran out, then he turned to his friends in Hollywood. And so Oprah's a big contributor. A lot of movie stars, a lot of corporations are contributing to the cause. When Trevor worked for Scott, there were 200 kids in the school, and Trevor said, "Dad, Scott knew every single child by name. He knew their families, their backgrounds. Today, there are 2,500 kids in the school." He is like a modern-day Mother Teresa. Thank you. Scott is literally transforming the lives of these kids. And to this day, he doesn't own a car, doesn't own a home. He actually lives in the offices above the Cambodian Children's Fund. And I think Scott is a shining example that we can do hard things. We can do amazing things, make an amazing difference in life. And here's the cool part. We all don't have to move to Cambodia. That's a big relief to me, and probably a relief to you. We don't all have to be Scott Neeson. We aren't supposed to be. Scott is an example of exactly the amazing work that you are doing, the reason that you're here today. Like Scott, all of you are changing lives. You're changing generations, and those generations will indeed change the world. Here's my final thought. Whether you're Scott Neeson or Camron Wright or fill in your name here, we're each living our own story, and it's an amazing story, and so never quit in the middle. Sometimes we want to skip ahead, we want to be rescued. To do so would spoil a beautiful and a perfect ending. I like to remember the epigraph of the book. They're the words of Buddha. When you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. And know that Buddha's not the only one saying it. Alanis Morissette reminds us, life has a funny, funny way of helping you out. Bob Marley sings, because every little thing is going to be all right. And Paul explained to the Romans, all things will work together for our good. How often can you put those three together on a single slide? The message is the same. It resonates because it's brimming with truth. Listen carefully. It's a message that will change your life. Thank you very much.